All right. Hello. Welcome to POV, You're My Therapist, the podcast where I vent, you listen, and you do not get paid. Today, my guest is Raquel Willis. This lady has so many ampersands in her title: author,
Mhm.
memoirist,
Mm.
activist, trans liberator, Black rights activist. Welcome, Raquel.
Thank you.
And author, I already said that, but author of an upcoming memoir
Yes.
called The Risk It Takes to Bloom. As you can
Mhm.
see, I'm knee deep in this book.
Mhm.
And first of all, upon reading this, and like by the time I got a quarter of the way through, you have such an ability to, don't be scared now. Don't be scared. But you have such an ability to really make people understand your mindset. And I think, like,
Mm.
as somebody who's writing about their trans experience, that's so important because
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of people have the misconception that people just wake up one day and they're like, oh, I want to transition, or oh, I'm gay. But I think you do a really good job at taking us step by step into seeing where your mind was at, the experiences that one validated you, the moments that made you really think about your gender identity. And I
Mhm.
see those places all throughout the book, which is why I can't skim.
Right. I
'Cause
got you.
yeah, because every time I try to skim, I dive deeper in the book and I'm like, damn, this is such a good piece. And then I feel bad because I'm skimming and I'm like, no. But while you were writing the book, was
Mhm.
it difficult to like tap into that part of your youth that was really confusing?
Well, you know what's interesting? It wasn't, which is why I'm glad I wrote it at this point.
Mm,
I'm glad I wrote it like 29 going into 30 because it really started in earnest in 2020, like
mm,
that book writing process. And by then, I just had so much distance. I think as a trans woman, there's for a long time been this feeling, at least for me, and I think a lot of other trans folks, like, I don't want to talk about growing up. I don't want to talk about pre transition because then you kind of feel like people are going to weaponize that against you or say, oh, see, you didn't start your medical transition till you were 20. So you don't know anything about womanhood. Like that was the
really?
world at least 10 years ago. And it still can be that way sometimes, but maybe not as much anymore. But
Mm,
I definitely had a lot of baggage, wanted to kind of shield myself from being chipped away at,
mm,
especially my womanhood. So all that to say, I think now is the perfect time. Like I'm on the other side of 30. Like you can't tell me shit. Like it is what it is. Like
right.
I got to be able to embody authenticity, vulnerability in a different way now because now people in movement see me as like an auntie, right? Or a big
Not
sis.
an auntie child.
I know, right?
Right.
But it comes through sometimes. And I just want to be able to like really be about it. Like, yes, I'm a trans woman. Like, it is what it is. Like,
Mm,
and I want them to be freed up to embrace themselves too. And they
mm.
really are. I mean, I think Gen Z and a lot of the younger folks, some of these trans teens I've been working on media projects with, they are so unapologetic in a way I definitely was not when I was their age.
Yeah, like reading
Mhm.
the book, it was so interesting because when you talk about a lot of your experience, like especially like in high school and then first stepping into
Mhm.
college, that little bit of freedom, I found myself relating to so much to it because in those ages, there was just this discomfort in your body already. And
Yeah.
there was especially a line you said about like your stubble. And I was like, girl, me
Ooh.
too. Because I have PCOS and no way equating that
Mhm.
to your trans experience. But I remember like being so uncomfortable in my body. And it was so nice, especially when you came out to your mom and reading
Mhm.
those places. Were you ever afraid of like how your family as a whole would react when you went from being, because I know you talk about your experience with your dad and how difficult that was,
Mhm.
and did you ever feel really hesitant to tell people that you were trans, or about the journey you were heading down because of his experience and how different that was from being gay?
Um, I think that, hmm, I think by the time I was like realizing that I was trans, it kind of was just like, this is what it is. Like I've arrived,
Period. Good.
Um, and the beauty of that was that I was 20, right? 20, 21, in college. So I was away from home. So I didn't really feel as beholden to my family's expectations, or at least that was like slipping away.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what I'm chronicling at that point in the journey. Um, I just couldn't imagine coming out about my gender any earlier than that. I mean, this was like, and you know this, right? This was like the late 2000s, right? We're talking pre Orange is the New Black. So Laverne Cox is still in reality television, mind you.
Okay.
We had Isis King, which I talk about a little bit on America's Next Top Model, and Chaz Bono and like people like that. But the trans experience is still very fringe. I mean, the gay experience is still very fringe. I mean, this is also like around the time Glee is coming out. And remember when Glee came out in that
Yeah.
pilot, how big of a deal it was that like Kurt was gay?
Yes, I remember.
That was still so novel. And it was funny because I had been out for like 2 years in high school by that point, because I think that was like 2009. And so for me personally, it was like, okay, child, like this isn't revolutionary. But for the world, that was still new to see a young person being openly gay.
That's crazy because I did not think about the timeline. I did not think about the year. 2009 was just a lot. A lot. And you think about
Yeah.
how media was just so vulgar, like in your face and like unkind, and like the most pretentious way, the way they talked about women, pop stars, and gay figures. You're right.
That
Like,
was the Britney year.
that was
big
the Britney year. That's the
Mhm.
Britney year. And so crazy, not to get off track, but I read a
Right.
tweet that said that week she was going to court for her kids, and they were going to drug
Mm.
test her hair.
And that's why she
And that's
cut
why
it.
she cut her hair. I don't know how true that is, because I did see that on the Bird app. But I read about that, and it made me think about the lack of nuance that there was in the media to even like think about that. And weirdly enough, I feel like the media is so much kinder to people now, maybe because I say that with a grain of salt. I think people are more scared about getting canceled, is what it is. So they're very
That's true.
careful about what they say in a space that exists forever. So I don't know if they're any kinder.
Well, in general, right? Because I mean, when I think about being trans now, yes, I can sit here and have this conversation with you, and I'm just like, and I can still be girl next door who's just happens to be trans, right? But even that is novel still.
Yeah.
People don't have any idea. Like, I have so many friends who are Black trans women who lead entire organizations, right? Who, are in school, like trying to get a degree, or, working at any other nonprofit, right? So there's still this idea, or there's still this invisibility to Black trans life in particular, that there's this idea that we don't exist outside of these basic ass jokes or social media discourse or whatever kind of fringe
Or what?
train of thought,
Right. There's a part of your book where you talk about, I forget what organization you were working with, but it was when you met your first sex worker and they were trans, and how you felt like kind of, I wish I didn't have to do this. And I think what you did so beautifully in that moment was recognize like your own lack of knowledge in that moment, as in, and I love that the lady told you you can't save everybody. Like, you're basically
Yeah.
nobody's savior. And I think that's so true because, like, people have this idea of what everybody looks like and what
Mhm.
jobs trans people can do and what their lives are limited to and who they are. And I think, like, simply put, it's so much more than that.
Mhm.
And I think your book does a really good job at talking about that because you take us through every step of your journey and where you're going. And you're just a girl living life. That's simply what it is. But people will look at you and want to equate you to this identity that they've made for you.
Mm.
Is that something that you still
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do think that, I part of what was so important about writing that chapter, Nobody's Savior,
Mhm.
you're talking about my homegirl, Tony Michelle Williams, another Black trans woman who is an ED, one of the EDs I was talking about of that organization now.
Mhm.
Um, in that moment on the stroll, what was important for me to learn in my organizing work was not only that I had had immense privilege to come from, a two-parent household, right? My parents both had advanced degrees, taught in higher ed institutions, came from a solidly middle class background,
Mhm.
was always going to go to college. Like, there was
Mhm.
not really an alternative not to, regardless of my identity, right? So I always felt like I was on that path and entitled to that in a way.
Mhm.
Um, but that is not the experience of the majority of the Black trans women that I know. Or even if they did have access to college at one point, that doesn't mean they were able to finish,
Yeah.
right? So it was important for me, both in my organizing, but also in my media and writing career, to be clear about the fact that I have all of these privileges. And also, I don't want to be the stand in for the Black trans experience either.
Mhm.
I don't want you to be like, I don't want you to use me as an example because we know people love to do that when
Mhm.
folks achieve a certain amount of visibility or access or success.
Mhm.
When you're on the margins, people want you to become the representative for the
Yeah.
community.
The
And it's
model
like,
minority.
no, honey,
Right.
I'm not trying to do that. I actually want my work to make it easier for the next girl to come up to not have to check off as many boxes as I
Mhm.
did, right?
Mhm.
And that's been important. So I think it's just we need to become best friends with nuance.
Mm.
Use nuance as a way to just help us think more expansively about other people's experiences beyond the labels,
Yeah.
right? Because when I tell you I'm a Black trans woman, that is literally all I'm telling you.
Mhm.
That's not telling you my journey. That's not even really telling you what my transition was like because there are
Mhm.
so many different ways to transition, right? That's not telling you where I come from. I'm a Southern girl, you
Yes.
know?
Yes, you are.
And as far as I know, the last major memoir about a Black trans woman from the South was Hiding My Candy by the Lady Chablis, who was in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil
Oh my
back in
god.
94, I believe, 1994.
Oh my god.
Mhm.
That's crazy.
And she passed, I think, in 2016, maybe 17, somewhere in there. And so that was always important to me, was that my work spoke to the Southern
Mhm.
experience, because now it's sexy to be like, "Oh, we gotta make sure the South is okay." Whether it's
Girl,
politically or, and you know this,
I know.
it
Yeah.
all hinges on Georgia. What was that when the Stacey Abrams
Yes, they were
election
counting
was
on Georgia,
happening?
child.
When John Ossoff and,
Mhm.
Warnock,
Raphael. Yeah.
yeah, when they were running,
Yeah.
it was like it all hinges on Georgia, and I'm like, "Oh, y'all paying Georgia some mind
Right.
now?"
You know what? I was actually telling somebody yesterday that politically, I feel like if you got rid of all the gerrymandering, without a doubt, Georgia would be
Mm,
so democratic and
mm.
so liberal. Because in my county, Henry County, in the year, I think,
Outing yourself.
I know, but I'm a Southern girl living in a Southern world. It's fine. Like, I can't even hide it anymore. Like, I actually really like the South because before I moved to Georgia, I lived in Massachusetts.
Mm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. See her face? Yeah. That's everything you need to know. Literally living in Massachusetts, the amount of like microaggressions that you
Mhm.
just experience every day. Every day. And I really like Georgia because you don't. You know where the racists are. They live
Mhm.
together. They live in a little town and they love each other.
Yeah.
They don't love you, but they love each other.
Mhm.
And you can avoid them because the minute you turn into their neighborhood, you know what you're going to see? A Confederate flag.
Yeah.
And then you say, oh, let me pull a Yui. And then you go
Mhm.
home. Like in my town, that was, I want to say it's the fastest growing town in Georgia. I think
Mm.
it might be in all of the South.
Okay.
They went from, in 2 years, went from being Republican to Democrat.
Mm.
And I mean across the board.
Mhm.
From state legislation to, no, not sorry, not state legislation. Why did I just lie? From like countywide, from the people who do the schools to the mayor, all of it, Democrat.
Mhm.
And a lot of the times you realize that people are Democratic, they just don't realize it.
Yeah.
They
That's
say,
also a thing.
they complain about, like, I remember my mom is a nurse or was a nurse, and she used to work in the
Mhm.
ICU. And she had this poor dad who his daughter was dying. She was on her deathbed. And he couldn't take care of her. And the hospital was the only way that he knew could take care of her, or the only
Mm.
people with the means to. They were trying to kick him out of the hospital because he had no money. So the nurse that he had was telling him, if you sign up for Obamacare, your daughter can be, and he's like, I don't want to hear nothing about Obama.
Yeah.
Literally, like that was just his whole thing.
Wow.
Then somebody said to my mom, the nurse got so fed up, she was like, Merlon, deal with this, I can't. So she goes in there and she's like, there's something called ACA,
Yeah.
which is literally Obamacare. But
Mhm.
because it was not Obamacare, he signed up for it and he was able to take his daughter home and have a live-in nurse with her. And that's just my experience living in the South, because I know it hasn't always been that way. I know that for sure. But I think I would rather the racism live where it lives than having to meet a doctor who has microaggressions, who
Mhm.
the minute he walks in the room, he's like, hey, girl,
Right.
Miss Diva, like some shit like that. Or like having school teachers be like, your hair
Mhm.
is a distraction.
Mm.
Or things like that. And like, that's why I personally love the South.
Oh, yes.
Okay, good. Good,
Yeah.
good,
I
good.
mean, it's so funny. I grew up wanting to get so far, as people would say, out of Dodge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I felt like for me to be my fullest self,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that I was different, didn't know I was queer or trans or anything, but just knew I was different and I was being bullied for it. I thought that that required moving somewhere else. And again, thinking about context in the 90s, I mean,
Yeah.
everything you watched on TV, especially like Black media, like Living Single or Martin, or even like Family Matters was like in Chicago.
Mhm.
Things were set in like New York or
Mhm.
San Francisco in general. Like that was it. I mean, like what you didn't really see things set in the South.
Mhm.
So in my mind, as someone who was always soaking up media, okay, I
It
gotta go
just made
somewhere
sense.
else. And then when I learned that like the historical gay meccas are like New York and San Francisco, that added a new layer.
Isn't it so crazy that now Atlanta is a black gay
Mhm.
mecca? Not only are there gays, but they're black, which
Yeah.
is so like unheard of. And I
Mhm.
think like Atlanta, I don't like Atlanta for so many different reasons, but I
Okay.
will give her
Why?
props.
Give us the reasons.
First of all, these are very silly reasons.
Okay.
But why are we paying $600 to go to the club and sit on a couch? Why are we doing
Okay.
that?
People
Why
like to stunt. That's true.
why is the bottle of Casamigos $60?
Mm.
Actually, no, it's not. That's how much it is in the store for like a big one. At the
Mhm.
club, it's like, what, $500? I just have an issue. I feel like it's a very, okay, I can't. I'm gonna try not to rant because I hate this. It's an issue I've noticed in the last 2 years after the
Mhm.
pandemic. The food used to be good. Nightlife used to be good. I think people got very money hungry, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of socioeconomic, political reasons why, we're in a position for, I think, when you don't have money, when you don't have opportunity to make money through normal routes, you almost, and then there are people in your face telling you you're just not hustling hard enough,
Mhm.
that you need to get your grind on, you need to make a side hustle. When you're bombarded by that shit, you lose a little bit of morality and you start opening these random fucking hookah bars. These last couple of years is there's so many new restaurants, so many new things, but the
Mhm.
quality's not there cuz like a lot of people are just trying to make a quick buck. And I'm not
Yeah.
the only one with this issue. Have you ever been on Atlanta restaurant TikTok?
No.
Oh girl, its businesses getting closed down.
Left and right?
Left and right.
Wow. I mean, I miss Atlanta a lot. Like, I miss
Really?
the South. I think I would move back to Atlanta.
You should be back to Atlanta.
Well, according to you, I shouldn't,
I mean,
but
the outskirts of Atlanta. Not
okay.
Atlanta. Selfish reasons here.
But it's wild for me to think about now, because I'm 32 now,
Mhm.
to think I was running them streets in Atlanta in my early 20s, which I'm actually so glad that I got to like
Mm,
just be, a wild 20 something and I wasn't visible,
mm.
like, I had like some followers on Twitter at that point, but I wasn't visible in the way I am now.
Oh, so you
So I
have,
was able to
so you was,
float
okay.
float under the radar. So I was out here.
Oh, period. We love a thought era.
Yeah, but it was also a different time. And I
Mhm.
think, I was very out as gay
Mm.
in school and like high school and then going into college from like 14. And then I came out as trans
Mhm.
around 2021.
Mhm.
And then I was out as that until I graduated.
2021?
No, 20 slash
Oh, I'm
21.
sorry. My brain.
Ages.
Okay,
No, no,
okay.
no.
I
Okay,
heard
so
the.
I graduated from the University of Georgia in 2013.
Okay, yes.
So it's been this has
A
been
hot
10
minute.
years.
It's been, yeah.
But when I graduated, and and this is a part of the book, I was like, I don't know what the rest of my life is gonna look like. Am I gonna be out at work?
Mm.
And then when I realized that I was not gonna be able to find a job in New York, because I was trying, but I didn't have an address here. No one was taking my
Mm.
application seriously. I found my first job in Monroe, Georgia as a newspaper reporter. And I had to be stealth there, right? So like go in the
Mm.
closet, was not out as queer or trans.
Wow.
And I think after that experience and then moving to Atlanta about a year and a half later, there was such a desire for me to just experience a
Mm.
part of my 20s, just like not having to think about my identity all the time.
Mhm.
And so I share that in the book, and I share this situation with this guy where
It's always a
I
guy.
didn't disclose to him at first
Oh my God.
that I was trans. But then we had a discussion. Nothing happened before we had the discussion. But I shared that because I wanted to be vulnerable about the fact that, like, especially in Black community,
Mm.
what I would always see when Black trans women were murdered is, oh, she must have tricked them,
Mm.
right? Or why wouldn't you tell somebody? Or there's this entitlement that people have to our identities when they think that cishet men's masculinity or identities are on the chopping block or may be called into question. Any other time, people don't want us to talk about our transness.
Wow.
Makes them uncomfortable.
Mm.
But when we're talking about desire or we're talking about hookup culture or dating or whatever, people feel so entitled to our identities in a way that they don't feel entitled to other aspects of people's lives.
Yeah.
So one of the points I make in that chapter with that guy who was feeling away but then was like ultimately okay was like, you feel so entitled to my identity because we're meeting randomly, first of all.
Mm.
You didn't care about, what my STD status was, since you assumed something physical was going to happen.
God.
You didn't care about so many different aspects of who I am as a person. But you're going to hang your hat on my transness because you think you being attracted to me and not understanding that is a problem. And you think that I'm threatening your masculinity or your heterosexuality, which is all kind of tied up together.
So these days, how do you go about that? Like, I don't
Mhm.
know your relationship status, but like,
Yeah.
are you single
I am single. I mean,
and ready to
I'm
go?
dating.
Okay, dating.
We have a few prospects. We'll see who wins.
Oh, we're building the roster.
Yes.
Period. So how do you go about that? Like when you're dating, is this obviously you have a memoir coming out? And to be honest, if I were you, I would literally just throw the book at them. Literally throw the book at them.
Yeah.
And be like, read up, honey. Like catch up.
And we're hoping they'll be able to get through it, but that's a whole nother thing.
They're gonna get through it. They're gonna, because it's good writing.
Well,
really.
Thank you.
I don't know why you look so skeptic every time I say that. It is good writing.
Thank you.
Because it's transformative in so many ways, and I mean like the words itself on the page. I think honestly, people who have trans children who might not understand, this would be a good book to read. I feel like it puts them in very simple terms that I am just a person.
Yeah.
Figuring out myself. And it doesn't change who you are at your core. There's so much that, like, looking as an outsider at Black masculinity and having to date within Black masculinity and, like, deal with, like, I don't know my dad, or I don't know him, but I do know his best friend who, because of my father's shortcomings, this man doesn't show up for anybody, but he will show up for me.
Yeah.
And that is the only positive aspect of masculinity that I have to like grasp onto. And seeing like your experience with a father who was very loving. And who was, but still the only time that you really felt that you could not really care about how your masculinity was seen in his eyes was when he was
passed.
Yeah, it was when he passed. Like that's such a shame because they didn't get to know you in your full bloom.
Yeah.
These days, when you think about that, do you ever wonder how your relationship with your dad would be like now?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've had so many times over the last several years where I've been like, will my dad even recognize me on the street if he was like beamed back to earth and we passed each other? Would he have been able to evolve like the rest of my family? Would my family have evolved, right? Because also in our families, often so much of the affirmation or the acceptance comes from the example set by the patriarch or the matriarch, right? And if they don't set that example, that can have devastating effects on your relationships with everyone else in your family. So I do think about that a lot. I like to give him grace. I mean, literally, he passed in 2011. So it's been 12 years. And I've clearly changed a lot in 12 years. So the way that I make it through is trying to give him grace that he would have evolved to. And I think what I most hope people take away from my discussion about my relationship with him was, to your point, I mean, he was a loving father, right? And he was present. He was everything that, people claim Black men and Black fathers aren't and can't be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of his love was corrective because it was about protection.
Mm-hmm.
Because he knew what space was there for me as, at that time, someone being raised as a young Black boy,
Mm-hmm.
to deviate from respectability.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this chapter in there called For Women Who Had a Boyhood, because
That's so funny.
that's another thing too, though, right? Is that as a trans woman, it has been a journey for me to get to a point where I can share about my boyhood,
Mm-hmm.
even though I never felt at home in that space of being seen as a boy. That's how I was raised, right? And so it feels early, and I don't know where that conversation goes, but there is a discourse to have that, like, there is a shared boyhood, right? That I think Black trans women, many of us, share with, like, Black cis men
Mm-hmm.
of all stripes, right?
Yeah.
So it's always interesting when, so you don't see it as much now, but there was like a point online where anytime people would talk about Black women or Black trans women in particular experiencing violence or being murdered, people would want to reorient the conversation around Black men, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
Black men and boys, which is an important conversation, right? But it's not the only conversation. And I think it's also interesting too, and I talk about this later in the book, because there's so much mourning throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that is personal, just with my father.
Mm-hmm.
But some of it is like mourning young trans teens who died by suicide, right? Or mourning Black people who were killed by the state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or mourning Black trans women who were killed by men in our communities.
Yeah.
But that mourning for me is all tied together. So I can't separate it out. So it's particularly hurtful for me when there are Black cis people who are like, who don't care about Black trans life, or there are Black cis het people who don't care about Black queer lives, right? Who don't care about the Shay siblings,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I don't have a choice but to care about
Mm-hmm.
all of our lives,
Mm-hmm.
because I see the interconnectedness.
Mm-hmm.
I see how broken our community is by these white supremacist concepts of respectability, of gender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was going to be the next thing that I asked you,
Mhm.
actually, was I know all the time, and it's always like my white friends. Well, they're not my friends, just people I
Oh,
onlook.
they can be your friends.
But, they always talk about like fatigue,
Mhm.
experiencing these kinds of fatigue.
Yeah.
And I think what you just said really goes hand in hand. You can't experience fatigue
Mhm.
because if it's not your skin, it's your gender. If it's not your gender, it's your life experience. And all of
Yeah.
that is always hanging on by a thread because there's always somebody trying to take away your rights.
Mhm.
And I always get so confused, especially when Black women are transphobic, because I'm like,
Yeah.
girl, they're trying. I'm like, girl, wake up! Like they trying to fuck all of us over. What do you
Mhm.
mean? And it's funny enough. I was watching this morning the Vice. It was a long time
I
ago.
know. Someone recognized me from that yesterday
Really?
on the elevator at this building. They were like, "Were
Child,
you in the Vice interview?" And I was like, "Yes."
that's such good memory.
Eyes crossed
there.
and everything. Yes.
Listen, I watched it this morning and I was like, Lord, because there's another person on the panel who is also a trans woman, and they
A
have
white
yes,
trans woman.
that's a very important
Conservative
yeah.
trans woman, allegedly. But
I
it can be for show. I feel like for a lot of conservative talking heads,
yes, talking
it's
heads.
acting for them, honey.
I don't even know because My childhood friend, one day, well, we're not friends anymore, but one day she just popped out with a MAGA hat. She
Oh,
black, child. That was the most confusing thing.
it was subversive.
Like, and knowing her
Hmm.
before she made that decision, I know that she would never agree with me if I said it. But knowing her and having had countless sleepovers, talking about our deep, dark fears and crying and sliding down the wall, throwing up, all of it, I know that her need for this conservative life, this married to a MAGA pro, all of it.
So she's like a reverse Jenny and Clarence Thomas.
Yes.
Okay.
That took me a minute.
I know. Sorry.
I had to think.
There were layers.
I had to go through the Rolodex of
Okay.
what do these people look like. But knowing her, no, I know that like it stems from a place of not accepting the self and experiencing the whole time I was watching that, and that every time that lady opened her mouth, I was like, there are people who want to just remove themselves from their experience. And they have such a hard time. And I think so much spite towards, I feel like she had a lot of spite that she was not born assigned female. That's what I felt like. And
that's real.
And I felt like that spite translated into she needed, and I don't know, psychological terms or nothing, but she needed to, I don't know. I felt like she was judging herself before anybody judged her. And that's why she pivoted a lot of her aggression towards Jamie. I don't know if you remember, but they were non-binary.
Yes.
Okay, yes. And I was like, damn, you a grown-ass lady, you picking on somebody.
But it's so good you bring that up, because there have been discussions within trans community over the last at least year. I mean, and these aren't new, but it's been happening more on social media, particularly of trans women who, are cis assumed in their everyday life, like don't have to be out, saying that, oh, well, non-binary people are making it harder for me because people see you and they're confused about what I am. And I'm like, honey, that's exactly like cis women who say that trans women are making it harder for people to know who women are. And it's like, that is such a foreign idea to me, because for one, and to your point a second ago, and I've never really thought about this, but I've never had this desire. I won't say that. I think as a kid, I definitely was like, I wish I was just born a girl, or I wish I could just wake up and be a girl. Like, I definitely had those thoughts as a kid, and I talk about that in the book. But I think by the time I realized my transness had language and tools to identify what had been going on, I don't see my trans experience as lesser. That is foreign to me. I actually see transness as brilliant and beautiful and powerful, because I really had to be about this shit. Yeah. To show up authentically in this life, to grab my life and own it and claim it and say, this is the life I actually want. This is the life I actually deserve. And I think a lot of cis people could learn a lot from that, because as much as people like to say that trans people are confused about who we are and going through some things, honey, cis people are in a gender crisis. Cis people are online day in and day out complaining about, oh, am I the woman in the relationship or the man in the relationship? Complaining about their children liking things that they shouldn't because of their certain gender, or being raised as a certain gender, let's be clear. Having gender reveals that are causing wildfires.
I literally was about to say wildfires.
this obsession with gender that cis people claim that trans people have is actually a projection. The thing for me is that I just want more cis folks to just listen. To
Yeah.
listen, to learn, to commit to unpacking
Mhm.
your trauma, because inevitably you have some trauma around the cis hetero patriarchy, just
Mhm.
like you do around white supremacy
Mhm.
and maybe whatever else.
Earlier, you talked about for women who
hmm
had a boyhood.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
was because you transitioned later in life, and
It's so funny to me to think that
later in life is a
20 and 21
crazy.
was later in life
That's
because I
crazy.
felt like that. No, but no lie, I felt like that when I was starting my transition 12 years ago,
That was
because
wild on my
all
behalf.
the literature was like the
Yeah.
further you get away from your teenage
Mhm.
years, the less changes you're going to have. And then, of course, everything was about being able to blend in,
Mhm.
passing, as we
Mhm.
said then, being cis assumed is
Mhm.
what we say now. Another mouthful. We love our words, but it works for now. So I did feel like I was late, and I had been through my first puberty, right?
Mhm.
Like I didn't have access to puberty blockers. But the funny thing is, we're talking about 2011, 2012, virtually no one was transitioning in their teenage years at that time. Of course, there were a few people,
Mhm.
right? And some of them we knew in media. If you think
Mhm.
about it, like a Kim Petras or
Mhm.
I think like Nicole Maines, who's an actress. But that was not common.
Mhm.
And so actually most of the narratives were trans women who transitioned in their senior years or a little bit later, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny to look back now, because when I look back now, I'm like, oh, actually that was very young. And that's the interesting thing about the trans community,
Yeah.
is that when we think about age, and we think about there's just different layers of how we think about maturity and age. Because you could be 40, but if you came out as trans and started living your life openly, like last month or last year, you're at a different space and stage
Mhm.
than, for instance, me and like a bunch of my homegirls, which many of us started our transitions in our early 20s, right? Or in our late teen years. And by late teens, meaning like 19, when we left the house,
Mhm.
Anyway, so that's my long, like, kind of thing. But it's like you said later in
That
life.
that later in life was crazy on my part.
It's funny. It's funny because I felt that, right?
Yeah.
And there is a different kind of security and confidence I have now, where it's like, oh, I've lived like a huge chunk of my life as my true self.
Mhm.
And I think that distance from that earlier part of my transition makes me feel less like anybody can say shit to me. Like, you can't say shit to me, because the bulk of my adulthood, minus maybe 2 or 3 years, was me moving through the world as a woman. So for you to tell me I don't know what misogyny is
Mm.
or whatever, honey, I'm gonna go out, walk on the street
And have the same
and give you
experience
the
as you.
same. I'll give you the crash
Yeah.
course, honey, because I've experienced it.
So do you think if you had access to,
Mhm.
I don't know what the kids were reading like in those days,
'Cause
but
that was
like
pre-Janet Mock.
yes. And I was going to bring this up later, but
Mhm.
the first, and I wanted to ask you this too,
Yeah.
was the first time that I ever heard the word trans woman or
Mm.
transgender was Janet Mock's article in
And
Marie
Marie
Claire.
Claire. Mhm.
And I must have been in like 8th grade. And
Wait, how old are you?
I'm 28.
Okay.
People think
Okay.
I'm 19, bro.
Well, because I was in college, like, trying to figure out how I was gonna get a job after I graduated, so it's so
When
funny
that
you say
article
that.
came
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Oh,
I was
listen.
in journalism school. So that when I read that article, it was so revelatory for me,
Mhm.
to see this Black trans woman who had
Yeah.
navigated this career in journalism.
Yes.
And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
that is possible, you know? And also, I mean, the thing about her story was
Mhm.
having to be stealth to survive, right?
Mhm.
And I experienced like a tad bit of that. But the cool thing is like because of people like her and Laverne Cox and Gina Rosero and Carmen Carrera,
Mhm.
it wasn't so impossible
Mhm.
for me to tiptoe out of the stealth closet and have a career where I could be openly myself.
Yeah. If you had had access to that Janet Mock article when you were
Mm.
like 8, 9, or something similar, and you knew you could get access to like hormone blockers, what have you, do you think you would have transitioned earlier? Would you have wanted to transition earlier, or do you think that it happened at a very good space and time?
Well, I'm a no regrets kind of bitch, right?
Period.
So everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. It's
Mhm.
so funny. My mom and I we talk about this every now and then, and we were talking about this a few weeks ago, and we were just like on the phone and just talking about how, because she says this often. She's like, your life is just so beautiful. Like, she's like, you're happy, right? Because, like, you seem happy, but like, I want to
Right.
make sure.
You seem very happy, by the way.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
I am. I mean, I feel very fulfilled. So everything has landed the way it needed to land. I don't know if, which is weird to say as someone who works in media, if media would have been enough for me to understand my gender, even if it happened earlier. Because so much of me understanding transness was, I'm the type of bitch who also got to see it in person,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so meeting trans people in college,
Yeah.
that combo with
And Rebel DeVoe.
Rebel DeVoe, that combo with drag performance, Rebel DeVoe, former drag name, and the media aspect, and learning about systems of oppression in women's studies courses, gender studies
Them
now.
gender studies courses will do it.
All of
Absolutely.
that little gumbo, that was my gumbo of awakening.
Yeah.
So I don't know what would have happened without even one of those
Yeah.
ingredients. Because in Augusta, Georgia, like, I didn't even have access to many openly queer people.
One thing I love about your book, and that was such a breath of fresh air, is your mom. It was
Mm-hmm.
so nice because I know, and even in high school, the thing you just said about waves, I was thinking about one of the very first gay people that I knew and how
Mm-hmm.
his mom was really his safety because
Mm-hmm.
his father was very anti, which anytime anybody's too anti something, I'm like, I know
Child.
something you don't. Like, I know something you don't. Cause if you're secure in your shit, you're not gonna
Mm-hmm.
care. You're really not gonna care. But
Yeah.
your mom has been such a place of peace for
Mm-hmm.
you. How I mean I think anybody can tell, but how have you felt? How much easier do you think it's made your journey having somebody like that in your life?
Oh, so much more. I think a core part of my conviction about my womanhood is that my mama accept me. So it's like, people always have these ways that they often try to like chip away at trans people's identities. They'll be like, "Oh, well, what do your family think? What does your parents think? Is that what your mama call you?" Actually, yes.
Mm-hmm.
That is what my mother calls me, right? And she was in on the process of me choosing my name. I feel very blessed, very privileged to have that support because I don't know who I would be without it. So if anybody tries to come at me, I'm like, if my mama can accept me, since you want to care about wombs and all this, well, the woman who has the one that I came out of accepts me.
Mhm.
So why can't you?
Yeah. I love that. It makes me really, that was one of the, I let out such a huge sigh when I read that you came out to your mom and she was accepting and she helped you. And it wasn't
hmm
that she was just accepting, but she was integral in the
Oh, she
process.
was eager. She was a little eager beaver. Cause and part of it was I strategized with that too. I didn't get to go into too much detail at that point in the book, but I knew if I was questioning my gender and how I was gonna move and navigate through the rest of my life, I needed to bring her into the fold sooner rather than later.
Mhm.
So when I was like questioning, okay, am I gonna embark on this transition or not? I knew she had to be there at that point in the process, not later. Because
Mhm.
I kind of learned my lesson when I was a teenager
Mhm.
that like I didn't want to wait too late,
Mhm.
and have her feel like I hadn't been
Yeah.
as forthcoming. We had been through so much by that point already
Mhm.
anyway. I mean, my dad had passed.
Your
I'd seen
grandma.
my grandma. I had seen her at her lowest.
Mhm.
So I think that there was an opening there.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that, yeah, we went through it together.
Mhm. So
Mhm.
now that you've bloomed, I love the title.
Well, we're always blooming, but, in a way.
Are there, because one of my major things and like
Mhm.
my therapy journey, all of that is healing the inner child. And I always love talking about the inner
Mhm.
child. You now in your 30s on the other side of things, are there things that you're doing to heal parts? You're already shaking your head, yes. To heal the experience that you didn't have as a
Mhm.
child.
Um, the funny thing is I got a new therapist during the process of this book,
Really?
and it's been so necessary, so revelatory. They hold me accountable in ways I didn't think therapists
Did.
did.
Yeah. Hmm.
Because if your therapist doesn't piss you off
Yeah.
every other session,
Hmm.
you might need a new one.
Yeah.
Because it's
I don't like agreeable therapists. I think
no,
they're
and
not
I
doing their
and
job.
I thought that those were the
Mhm.
good ones. I mean, and no shade,
Good one.
no shade,
You agree with
right?
me. I love you.
But I think I needed a therapist who could completely see through my bullshit. Because, honey, I can charm you,
Yeah.
and some people are charmers,
Mhm.
right? And like, yes, and yes, I'm endearing, but this current therapist knows, oh, but there's something underneath that.
Mhm.
Because this desire to smooth everything over
Mhm.
comes from some
Yeah.
stuff. So now I think in going back and looking at family and my childhood and also friendships and how I navigated that, I mean, I had to have a lot of conversations with people about things I had written, like former partners,
Oh my god.
talking to family members that we had little like
That sounds like my personal hell.
tiffs and riffs.
Oh my god.
So there was some healing there, but I think the journey that I'm on that is beyond that book is now it and this is why I say I think we consistently bloom. It's a different kind of blooming that's happening now
Mhm.
because intimacy
Mhm.
is something that I really feel like I just started tapping into in a different
Mhm.
way in this book, you know? Um, and I want to tap into more in future works. But with family, like as close as my family and I are, um, I think what I noticed was, and I talk about this in the book, so much of my life was about, up until this point, was about trying to overcompensate for the ways that I wouldn't have a typical life
Mm.
or a palatable life. So it was always like, okay, I'm queer, I'm trans, but I can still do all these other things.
Mm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I can still be successful.
Mm-hmm.
I can still be intelligent. I can still have all the right words. I can still find love. I can still make a family that looks
Yeah.
like all the other ones. And it's like, honey,
That's exhausting.
that is exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And why is it like a despite
Yeah.
these things that make you so brilliant and unique and beautiful and engaging? So what is it, right? Like, what are the
What do you have to
expectations?
prove?
Right. What
Mm-hmm.
do you have to prove? Who are you trying to prove it to?
Mm-hmm.
You say you've shattered all these expectations, but honey, you just holding on to
Mm-hmm.
some other ones.
Oh my God.
And I think that is the universal thing that people who are not trans, people who are not queer, people who aren't even Black, right,
Mm-hmm.
can take away from this book and
Mm-hmm.
take away from our voices,
Yeah.
Black, queer, and trans people's voices.
So my last question.
Hmm
What was your favorite part about writing this memoir?
My favorite part of writing the memoir, finishing it. No,
Oh.
I mean I was in a sprint to like get through some editing. I was like, you know what? It's gonna take me like another few hours. I could just keep going, but I could also just take a nap. I went to sleep. And then I had a dream. My family and I were like getting ready for some event. It was like my mom, my sister. We were like backstage. It was kind of funny because I didn't have shoes on. So I don't know what that symbolism was. And then Oprah was there and it was like we were taking a photo and they were like, well, it was Oprah and Gail. And they were
And Gail.
And Gail, of course. And we ran to get my shoes because my sister was like, girl, why you ain't got your shoes on? So ran to get my shoes, ran back, we got the photo. Then I called my family in with my little nibblings to get in the photo too.
Nibblings.
Cute moment. This was such a vivid dream. Then after that moment, we were backstage at some show. I don't know if I was like getting ready to speak or something, but my family was there. I look over to another random stage that's like in the back that only I can see.
Mm-hmm.
My grandma is on that stage and she looks young and she's like wearing this like 1950s dress with this like big bow in the back and it's like chartreuse and her hair is done up and she's just smiling widely and like waving to the crowd, living her best life. And I saw my dad and he's like walking over, but I'm the only one that can see them. So I'm very aware that they're not like alive again. Like I'm basically seeing ghosts. I'm like, Dad, tell me what to tell mama because I have this feeling that like this is going to disappear in a second. I don't know if I knew it was a dream, but it felt like that. And he was like, just tell her that she can do whatever she wants. Just noticed he looked a little weary. And I was like, I think I like grabbed his arm and I was like, you have to heal. Dad, you have to heal for the men in our line.
Wow.
Basically, because like, honey, I can't do it because honey, but but that dream was so vivid and it happened at the end of this process. And then everything went black and it was just like flowers were just like raining down or something. I don't know. And then I woke up and I was like crying and I was like, that is the most beautiful dream I've ever heard or I've ever experienced. And my takeaway was just like, whatever happens, it'll be beautiful about finishing this book. So that was probably my favorite moment. One of my favorite moments for sure.
That was so lovely. Thank you so much for joining me today, Raquel.
Yeah.
So
Of
tell the
course.
girls where, please excuse all of my tabs.
You can get The Risk It Takes to Bloom on Life and Liberation, available wherever you get your books on November 14th, 2023. Definitely support Black-owned bookshops,
Yes.
women-owned bookshops, queer and trans-owned bookshops.
Thank you for joining me.
Of course. Thank you for having me.